Welcome. This is Edgar Oliver for the Primary Stages Oral History Project. Today is November 30th, 2017. Thank you so much for being with us, Edgar.
Yeah, thanks for asking me, son.
Well, let's start. Where were you born?
I was born in Savannah, Georgia. And that's where I grew up, pretty much. Well, I was born there, and I lived for a while, when I was maybe 2 and 3, in Dallas.
What brought you to Dallas?
Well, when my mother and father married, they moved to Dallas from Savannah to start a new life there. And our father, Helen, I always say our because I think of myself as part of a duo of Helen and Edgar,
Right.
sister Helen. Our father was working for the water department there in Dallas. But he died 2 months before I was born. But we did live there for about 2 years, in my very early childhood. But most of the time in Savannah.
And after he died, did your mother stay in Texas?
Well, I just learned very recently that, our father died in Dallas suddenly of a morphine overdose, which Helen and I did not know until I was 16. Mother always told us that our father had died when I was a year and a half old of a heart attack. But he died 2 months before I was born, there in Dallas. Mother came back to Savannah and I was born there. And I just recently learned from Helen that after I was born, Mother left me in Savannah with her mother, Edna, and went back to Dallas with Helen for a while. I guess, I don't know, I'm sure the whole situation was a lot for her to deal with. I don't even know how long I was left with Edna, our grandmother.
You were living with her at the time? In her house? Or was there? Okay.
Yeah. It was a strange thing to discover because Mother, in some ways, I don't know whether it would be too strong to say I don't think she hated her mother, but she had a very difficult relationship with her mother.
Tell us about the family.
I never really knew all that much about my father when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. Mother didn't really speak about him a lot.
And your grandparents, you knew them fairly well?
Well, almost all the men in my family were dead. It was a family of widows. I certainly knew both of my grandmothers. Yes, but neither of my grandfathers are my father.
Did you go to school in Savannah?
Yeah.
You and Helen both went to school? Where did you go to school?
Well, when I was in the first and second grades, I went to school in Alexandria, Virginia. Mother was always trying to escape Savannah. But she would always say to us that Savannah was a trap, and that even if you managed to escape, it would find a way to drag you back. So in the first and second grade, I was at a school called Cora Kelly School, a public school in Alexandria. But then, in the middle of second grade, our father's mother, Helen, our grandmother Helen, died. So we moved back to Savannah. And then Helen and I went to this really fun school, and I really liked that school. It was called 37th Street School, this public school on 37th Street in Savannah. But then when I was in the 5th grade, Mother enrolled us both in a Catholic school called Cathedral Day School, which was really fun too, except for the horrifying nun who was the principal of the school, Sister Mercia, who seemed to have it in for me somehow. I speak about that in the trilogy, Sister Mercia, the evil nun, how when I was in the 6th grade, my voice changed, and she would corner me in the cafeteria and back me up against a wall and peer down at me and say, "There's something wrong with you. You should see a doctor. There's something wrong with your voice," which was sort of horrifying. But apart from that, I actually liked Cathedral Day School.
Did you do theater in the school?
Yes, we did. Helen and I did. When I was in the 5th grade, Helen, who was a year older than me, is a year older than me, her class staged a play. I don't exactly remember what all happened in the play, but Helen was in the play as one of the Dutch twins. I guess they were children from all different countries. All the children in Helen's class were playing children from different countries all around the world. And Helen was one of the Dutch children, and they were the Dutch twins. And so Helen's teacher, Ms. Frizzell, asked my teacher, because I was not in her class, I was in the 5th grade, if I could be in the play with Helen and be the other twin. Because everyone always thought Helen and I were twins. So Helen and I began our theatrical career together, playing twins. And then after our grandmother, Helen, died, we moved back to Savannah. And at 37th Street School, well, I should add also that when I was in the 1st and 2nd grades, I was a horrible student. I had great difficulty learning to read. I remember cheating my way through lots of exams, and my teachers thought I was very problematic. But when I got to Savannah, this sort of change came over me, and I became suddenly very reclusive and studious. It was, in retrospect, I don't know, almost like a form of possession by another spirit.
Is this about the time you started writing poetry?
Well, no, I was, at this point I was 7.5,
Oh,
or
7.
8 years old.
Wow, really?
But while we were at 37th Street School, when I was in the 4th grade and Helen in the 5th grade, Helen wrote a play that was staged by her class called The Secret Dungeon, which was an amazing play. I myself, it never occurred to me that I would write for the stage until I got to New York and started performing in nightclubs. But I did, I guess when I was around 15 is when I decided that I wanted to be a writer. But I always thought of myself as a poet, someone who wrote poetry. I didn't think that I would write for the stage.
Did you see theater when you were in Savannah, you and Helen?
Not very often. I did think about that a little bit because I read the questions, and the first thing that popped into my mind was that the most powerful theatrical experience I had, with the very first one, was, I guess, when I was around 14 or 15, when we watched Oscar Wilde's Salome on TV. It was a televised production, I guess, on Channel 13 in French with subtitles.
Wow.
And I remembered I was just utterly transfixed by it.
Did they do it like the Aubrey Beardsley drawings that had been originally done, or?
The production was very much like that. Yes,
Wow.
I don't know what production it was, but it just completely transfixed me, and I think I just identified so passionately with this young woman's obsessive love for this beautiful man who spurned her completely, and her. I loved it. So that was the one thing that really came to mind for me when I read that question.
Your family, you, your mother, and Helen were very creative at home, were you not? Did you put things together?
Well, yeah, Helen and I were raised to be artists by our mother. Mm-hmm. We were raised to be visual artists.
Your mother was a painter.
Yeah, and I think she was a great artist. And I think Helen is too. But I, over the course of my childhood, just began to realize that Helen was so incredibly gifted as a visual artist, and I was not. And that was a devastating thing to have to accept. But eventually I decided that I wanted to be a writer, and that helped me to accept that.
And then you began to work together when she did your sets. Is that correct? And
Yeah.
things like that. How beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at some point I read you were trying to run away from your mother. Would you explain? So that was the first time you were trying to leave You were in high school at the time, and then what happened?
Well, I guess that Helen and I began to become somewhat rebellious as teenage children do. But, we did lead such utterly isolated lives with our mother. And we were just always so completely alone.
And doing things mostly that she wanted you to do, or how did that work out?
Well, it was always tons of fun with Mother, She was really fun to be with, and we would do really fun things. We loved to go driving in the countryside and exploring swamps and playing in cemeteries and sketching with Mother. We'd always bring our sketch pads. But we did begin to want to go off sometimes by ourselves, and Mother didn't seem to want to let us do that. And that was all coupled with the fact that Helen and I had begun to study French obsessively and began communicating in what we thought of as French, which we later, when we got to France, learned wasn't French at all, but it was this sort of, kind of French that we made up. But I think that having that secret language kind of stoked our sense of plotting, of escape, When
was your first attempt to leave?
Well, not until I graduated from high school.
And how did that happen?
Although in the last 2 years that I was there, that I was in high school, Helen and I, we got bicycles, and Mother never taught us to drive. I don't know, it never occurred to me that would be a natural thing for a teenager to learn how to do. It never occurred to Helen either. But we began to like to go off sometimes by ourselves on our bicycles, but we would have to, Mother wouldn't let us do that. So we would have to wait until the middle of the afternoon when Mother would go upstairs to lie on the sofa in the front bedroom and practice self-hypnosis, and she would put herself to sleep. And then Helen and I would sneak downstairs and get our bikes and sneak outside and jump on our bikes and zoom off. But always, we would look behind us and there would be Mother in her blue Chevy too, bearing down on us and trying to drive us off the road. So that really stoked our determination to somehow get away. But then
How did you get the money to go to Paris?
Well, we were very lucky in that our father's mother, our grandmother Helen, had left us money in trust, so we were able to get some money from that.
Wow.
You know.
Did you get your passports in secret and all that sort of thing too? Did you
No,
do that?
we got our passports with Mother when I was 16, because we had persuaded Mother that that summer we should all go to Paris. So we all three got our passports. And then the summer began. Helen and I waited and waited for Mother to get plane tickets, you know, or to begin packing at least for this trip. And Mother didn't do anything. And then one day Mother started packing for our customary trip north by train to Washington for the summer. And we realized that Mother had no intention of going to Paris. Basically because she was terrified of flying. And we were enraged. So we stopped speaking to Mother. And we just didn't speak to her. We ignored her existence for several days. And Mother followed us about the house, begging us to acknowledge her. And we would say things like, "Oh, did you hear something?" "No, that must have been the wind." And on like the third or fourth day, Mother broke down sobbing. Said, "You don't know what I've been through. Remember how I told you your father died?" And at that point, we couldn't resist speaking to Mother. So we said, "Yes, of a heart attack when I was 1 year old." And Mother said, "Well, I lied. It was a morphine overdose. He died 2 months before you were born. I found him lying there." And we were so happy and excited to learn about this. We thought that was so romantic. God, we were very callous children. We told our Mother that it was obvious it wasn't an accident, that it was suicide, that she had driven our father to it. But at least we were speaking to Mother again.
Right.
But when Helen graduated high school, she went off to study at George Washington University. I stayed in Savannah, to finish my last year. At that point, I was going to a Catholic military school called Benedictine Military School, which was, thank God, not a boarding school. It was actually quite a fun school, really. It wasn't a horrifying disciplinarian kind of place.
Did you do anything with theater or writing in that school?
Well, I was the editor of the school paper. When I was a sophomore there, in my second year there, the English teacher who ran the paper made me the editor, which was kind of crazy for a sophomore to become the editor. I loved doing that. And then in my last year, I had a co-editor, this amazing boy named James O'Keefe, whom I really loved. But I was trying to write. I was writing poems, and one of my high school teachers, my high school English teacher, John Caparisos, really, really encouraged me to to write, to the point where he would stage these these writing contests. I don't know how often they took place, like at least once a month, between me and this other boy named Robert Weirs. And we each had to write a story, and then we read our stories, or someone would read them. I think Mr. Caparissos would read them to the class, and then the students would vote on which story they liked best. So it was like a contest, and Robert Weirs always won, which I didn't mind at all for some reason. His stories were always these strange, kind of, they were like stories by Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote very much in the Poe, in Poe's prose style. They were always stories told in the first person, about this man who murders his wife. And they always won, Robert was always won these contests. My stories, I don't know what they were about. They were, I'm sure, impossible to follow. And I think hopelessly, who knows, complicated. But it was really fun doing that, It meant a lot to me that Mr. Caparissos wanted me to write.
He must have thought you were a genius.
I don't know what he thought, but I think he believed in me somehow. I don't know when it was, maybe about 10 years after I left Savannah. I discovered, really, to my deep sorrow, that Robert Weirs committed suicide when he was in college. I think in his second year of college, he committed suicide. I think he always felt very strange and unloved.
And you graduated as valedictorian, did you not?
Yeah. And when I graduated, I was planning to go to Duke University. Well, in my last year there in Savannah, my last year of high school, when Helen left, to go to Washington, to go to school at GW, Helen was living for the first 3 days there, she was living in a dormitory. Helen hated it. And then Helen called up from Washington and to tell her mother how unhappy, horribly unhappy she was. Helen was in tears. And the next day, Mother packed and left by train to go to Washington and stayed there the whole year with Helen. So I was alone in Savannah for my last year of high school. And it was interesting because, every summer we would spend in Washington, renting a room on the top floor of Mr. Schweyer's house in Georgetown, this elderly gentleman named Mr. Schweyer, who rented rooms in his big old Victorian house. And we had been going there to stay from time to time ever since I was maybe 5 years old. And that room on the top floor was always there for Mother. And Mr. Schroyer was like a member of our family. And as soon as Helen got off the phone after having spoken to Mother, Helen told me later that she realized, God, why am I in the dormitory? I should just go stay at Mr. Schroyer's house. This is ridiculous. And she went and just, stayed there, which was fine with Mr. Schroyer. And then Mother arrived, and they were together that whole year. Mother would walk Helen to her classes every day and come to meet her. And I think that sort of contributed to Helen's determination, to escape. But I was, planning to go to Duke University, so Helen and I were going to go our separate ways. But then, after I graduated, I came to Washington to live with Mother and Helen in that room on the top floor of Mr. Schroyer's rooming house. And then Helen said to me, let's go away together to Paris. Let's just go together. And we did. And we lived together for the rest of our lives until I was 39 years old. So
how did you
that
get
really
to
changed
Paris?
our lives a great deal.
Of course. How did you get there without your mother knowing?
We rode in secret to the bank in Savannah. At that point, I had just turned 18, so we were both now legal adults, and we asked that the monthly checks be sent to us rather than Mother. And we just did it all in secret. Helen arranged all of it, I'm sure. Helen's very much better at stuff like that than me.
So you got to Paris finally.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel?
I think in a way we were wildly excited about finally being in Paris, this place that we dreamt of, where all the great painters had lived, and but we were also kind of terrified because we were scared to really speak French, even though we thought that we spoke it, so beautifully. We were scared of making errors, and we began to realize that we didn't really speak real French at all, that we spoke our own kind of French. And I think for the first 6 months we were there, we were probably deeply homesick and felt utterly bereft. But then we started loving it there. So.
Did you see theater in Paris?
Not really.
Did you see any performance art or anything like that? Did you find any while you were there?
The most amazing theatrical thing that we saw there was a small one-ring circus that we went to see that was in a single tent. I can't remember where it was exactly, but it was this beautiful striped tent, and there were all these amazing clowns, and I don't know, it just had this magical atmosphere, the whole thing did. I loved that. But we didn't really become involved in theater at all until we got to New York.
Up till now, what had been your major influences? Since you didn't see a lot of theater, but you were writing, did you see television or movies, radio?
Well, I guess Helen and I read a lot, but a lot of what I read was Gothic novels, you know. But I did read, well, Edgar Allan Poe, certainly. When I was 17, I read A Good Man is Hard to Find, the collection of one of the short story collections of Flannery O'Connor, which I loved so much. Also, I read A Death in the Family of James Agee, which I loved, and I still love both of those writers so much. And I also, that year, read Other Voices, Other Rooms, which those books made me really, really want to write prose, you know, stories. And I still love those books. I haven't read Other Voices, Other Rooms since I was 17. I just got it again. I'm going to read it soon.
Just
And I loved Wuthering Heights. And I read Ivanhoe, which I adored at that point, I think, because I just identified so much with Rebecca, you know, and I had read Rimbaud, you know, and I loved him, and Baudelaire. And then there was a very strange writer that Helen and I discovered together that when I was 17, that people don't really, Americans don't know him well. He's better known in France. His name is Julian Green. I don't know if you all know him. But we learned about him because Mother, although she was completely antisocial, she would go with us to this thing called the French Club.
in Savannah?
Yeah, in Savannah, which was this club that met, you know, like once a month, and it was run by this lady named Mary Catherine Mortry, who was this lady, lovely older lady from Savannah who had married a Frenchman and lived in France for many years. And it was this club for misfits, really, who wanted to learn to dabble in French. But Madame Mauduit, everyone called her, and she worked at the public library there in Savannah. And she devoted, well, she began to speak about this writer named Julian Green, who always wrote in French, but he was really kind of a Southern Gothic writer. He was born in Paris and grew up there in like 1890. He was born around 1899. But both his parents were Americans from the South. His father was from Richmond, and his mother from Savannah, or the opposite. I don't remember, one or the other. And he wrote in French. So the first novel that I ever read in French was a novel by him when I was 17. It was called Adrienne Mesurin, and in English it's called The Walled Garden. And I loved it. He was kind of like, he wrote these kind of Southern Gothic novels set in France. It was about this girl who was around 17 years old, who lived with her domineering father who would never let her set foot outside. She could only walk in this walled garden. And one day she peers over the wall and she sees this beautiful man who's just moved into this house next door. And she falls madly in love with him, and she just watches him over the top of this wall. And then one day, she pushes her father down the stairs and murders him. And then she's living alone in this house with her father's dead body and spying on this man that she's madly in love with over this garden wall. It was an amazing book. So, we read quite a few books by him when we were in Paris. I sort of lost track of what we were talking about.
That's all right. What made you, you left Paris? When did you leave Paris, and why did you leave Paris?
Well, we were going to the American College in Paris, which is only at that point it was just a 2-year school. So at the end of our second year there, Helen sort of had to return to finish her degree at George Washington University. And I didn't know what I was going to do, so I applied to the Courtauld Institute, which is a school for art history. It's part of the University of London. And I got accepted there. So after 2 years in Paris, Helen went back to America to spend a year finishing her degree at George Washington University. And I went to London, and I was there alone for a year. Which was a very difficult year for me. I was at that point so deeply attached to Helen, and was living in this, I had a room in this condemned hotel on Earl's Court Square. It was this old Edwardian mansion called the White House Hotel, where that was almost all abandoned, empty, but this man was running it still from the bar at the back of the lobby, where he ran this thing called the Defunct British Poetry Society. And these strange men would meet in this bar and discuss poetry. And somehow I had wound up staying in this squat with the stepmother of a friend of ours from Paris, this American woman named Leslie, who was 30 years old, but seemed like this all-knowing, older woman. And she found a room for me in this condemned hotel. So I was living there. There were no light bulbs in the hall. It was pitch black in the hallways. And there was almost nobody else living there. And I was in this big room on the 3rd floor overlooking Earl's Court Square. I would go to my classes at the Courtauld every day and then come back and hide in my room and make a dinner of a can of tuna and a can of corn and a chopped up cucumber and chopped onion with lemon and olive oil squeezed on top and drink red wine and look at myself in the mirror and go mad, and was just looking at myself thinking, that I loved and desired men, and I was just kind of admitting that to myself and going crazy. Then at the end of my first year there at the Courtauld, I realized that in my second year I was going to have to choose a century to specialize in my third year, choose a 30-year period from that century, and I thought that I would choose the 11th century, and I started to think that I was getting horribly isolated, and that maybe it wasn't good for me to be doing that. I decided that I wanted to come to New York and see what New York was like, and so I told the people at the Courtauld that I figured out that I could manage to transfer to Columbia, and so I did.
Mm-hmm. Again, in art history or literature?
Art history. So, at the end of my year at the Courtauld, I went back to Paris and met Helen there, because Helen had now graduated and she decided that she wanted to live in Paris. In the meantime, I should certainly tell you that, while we were the whole time we were living in Paris, Helen and I had left without Mother's knowledge, but we did, begin to correspond with Mother, and we became friends with Mother again through corresponding with her after having run away. So Mother knew at this point that Helen was going back to Paris. And Helen found a small apartment there, and I stayed with Helen over the summer, and then I got on a plane and came and flew to New York.
And what year was that?
That was 1977.
And what was New York like?
Well, I had actually been to New York once before. When we left Paris to come back, the summer before I went to the Courtauld, when Helen returned to go to GW, I came back with her. We landed in New York. I spent 2 nights there. It was the first time I'd ever been there. We stayed at a place called the Prince George Hotel on East 28th Street, I think. A beautiful old New York hotel. A huge bathroom with a big claw-footed bathtub. It seemed like a fun place at that point, you know. But then, when I got back and met Helen there in Paris, I remember a few days before I left to fly to New York by myself to go to Columbia, Helen and I went to the movies, and we went to see Taxi Driver. And I was completely horrified, to the point where I just got so scared at the thought of coming to New York that I almost cancelled. I almost didn't come. But then I got here, and I was renting a room by the week in a hotel on the Upper West Side. But I just felt like I wanted to see what it was like downtown. And I came down one day to look at a place an apartment I'd seen advertised in the Village Voice, a place in the West Village. And that day I didn't like the apartment that I looked at. I was walking back to get the subway back uptown. I was walking down East 10th Street. And I came to this really beautiful block, lined with many trees. And I was walking in front of this old, decayed townhouse. And I looked up just in time to see this gnarled hand reach through the Venetian blinds and tape a paper bag to the inside of the parlor floor window. And on the bag was scrawled in pencil, "Room for rent." I ran up the steps and rang the doorbell, and this old man answered the door. He said there was a room available on the top floor. And I rented it. And I lived in that house until 6 years ago.
And you made a fabulous piece about that East 10th Street.
Yeah.
Well, then did you start going when you were in New York to the Pyramid Club?
Yes.
Is that when you started going there?
Yes.
And that whole scene was something that appealed to you?
Yes, the Pyramid is what really got me thinking about doing theater.
What was going on at the Pyramid Club at the time when you went there? This was like around in the 80s?
Yeah, 81. And there were just these amazing drag queens and performance artists and just incredible performers doing shows there every day of every week, just every night. 3 or 4 shows. There was no telling what you were going to see if you went there. And if you lived in the East Village and went there and fell in love with it, you would just kind of go there almost every night, which Helen and I started doing. And, it just became like our other home.
Was anyone else doing poetry there at the time?
Well, I think maybe not. I don't know. Poetry was not really all that popular, as it generally isn't that much. Well, I don't know. But I mean, there were amazing people doing performances, the crazy stuff with sets and costumes and things. But Bobby Bradley, who managed the club, came up to me one night and said, "I hear you write poetry. Why don't you do some poetry here some night?"
Wow.
I said, "Okay," and then, I realized that I would be going on at like 1 a.m. after several, acts, which were like, crazy drag acts with costumes and, everything mic'd and staged, and plus after people had been dancing to really loud music, and I would sort of have to make my readings like performances if I didn't want to just be ignored. And I naturally gravitated towards writing what were really monologues anyway, So I just started kind of setting them to music that different people would compose for me. And having dancers dance while I performed these monologues, which was a very strange combination.
Did Helen work with you on these?
Sometimes, in some capacities, yes. And then Bobby Bradley asked me, he said, "Okay, why don't you come up with a play?" So I said, "Okay." And I wrote this thing based on a short story that I was writing called Motel Blue 19. And I wrote it as a play. And I got these different people to be in it along with me. And Helen did sets for it, and also my friend Brian Damage, and another friend of ours named Bill Schwartz. And we staged it. It was a one-night-only thing. And I was absolutely terrified. I felt the kind of terror that I think, well, who knows what it would really feel like. But it felt to me like the kind of terror that you might feel if you knew that you were going to be hanged that night. But we did the show. And the audience really seemed to like it. So Bobby Bradley asked me, to my horror, if I would do it again. I've gone through this one night, I'm never doing that again. But he demanded that, that we do the show again. And, he just kept asking me to do things. And and I started really enjoying performing.
You also did the Poetry Killer there as well?
Yeah,
Was that a group show or is that a monologue?
that was a monologue.
Okay.
Yeah, which
And then how did you get involved with La Mama?
um, well, um, do you know Liz Dunn?
No, I don't.
Liz Dunn was, at that point, was John Kelly's manager. She was managing John Kelly's performance career, and she had seen the 7-year vacation when I premiered it at this place, this old public school called Charas El Bohio.
Uh-huh.
It was on the Avenue B side of Tompkins Square,
Right.
that old public school. And Liz Dunn had just been hired by Ellen Stewart to book shows in the club there, in the cabaret at La Mama.
Mm-hmm.
And Liz,
So you had other
Right.
things happening before that, between the period at the Pyramid and La Mama. You went to other spaces like this space, and were there other places you had gone to first?
yeah, there was also a place called ABC No Rio,
Okay.
which was an amazing place that was very important to a lot of people for many years. It was an art gallery and performance space on Rivington
Oh.
Street between Suffolk and Clinton, or between,
Yeah.
between Suffolk and Clinton. And Helen and I somehow started going there too, where we met amazing people like Canberra, Father,
Mm-hmm.
and Samoa, and different performance artists, and we got invited to curate an exhibit there, and that's where I first performed Prince Lear's Playground. That was another monologue that I did very early on as part of an art exhibit that we.
There was a whole scene
Sure.
going on down around an Alphabet City area and so forth. So you were obviously part of that. Would you explain that to us or to me? What it was like being in that group?
Well, it was tons of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, just, all sorts of crazy things would happen at ABC No Rio, either in the gallery or in the backyard, sometimes by firelight. They build a bonfire in the back. And a lot of the performance artists from ABC No Rio would also do shows at the Pyramid, and just the different drag queens at the Pyramid were such great artists, like Ethel Eichelberger
My favorite. Yeah.
and Hattie Hathaway and Happy Face and Taboo, and John Kelly was doing shows there all the time. The first time I saw John Kelly at the Pyramid, he blew my mind completely and really, really inspired me to, to try and take risks and do, experiment with stuff, and Canberra did the most incredible performances, and Samoa, and Philly, and I don't know. It's just
Did Helen also do artwork for these groups? I know there are a lot of things happening for artists at that time, applied artists, if you wish, other than performance. Did she do work at this point?
Yes,
also,
yeah. So Helen would take part in these group shows,
Right.
and
Was that when the Carlton Hotel? She was doing rooms for the hotel, or
at a certain point
At a
that
certain point,
began.
yeah,
Yes. And there was also our dear friend Brian Damage, who we met one night. It was a Christmas Eve, and Helen and I went to a nightclub. I can't remember the name of the nightclub. This amazingly dressed young man came up to us and said, "Who are you?" We said, "Well, we're from Savannah." And he was Brian Damage, and he had made costumes for the band that was performing that night. It was a band called Shocks Lumania. And we saw them, and they were wild and strange, and blew our minds, and we became very good friends with Brian. He, did stage sets and costumes, and we became sort of his apprentices, and would help him or just go be with him in Hell's Kitchen in his apartment while he stayed up all night making costumes for these nightclub acts. And that's where where Helen learned how to use foam core and spray paint, and Krylon spray paint, and Velcro, and Buckram, and spandex, and all these things that he taught Helen, about set building. And then, Helen started making sets for my La Mama shows, and just became this great set painter and creator.
What was it like working with Ellen?
Oh, amazingly inspiring. I write these plays which were always about my childhood, usually in which at the beginning they were all about me, in which I was an only child living with this crazy mother, but Helen understood everything about the childhood I was writing about, because it was her childhood too, and the props she would make, I thought, were just so wildly strange and beautiful in this way that was I could never have conceived of, and also amazingly funny. They just...
Did Ellen make the props or Helen?
Helen.
Helen made the props, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And Ellen Stewart just loved the shows that, should we go down some of the shows that you did, for example?
Yeah, she would introduce the shows.
Oh, yeah, of course, with her bell.
Yeah, yes.
The Ghost of Brooklyn. You were born, by the way, October 31st. Has that influenced your life?
But actually, that's not true.
Oh, okay.
There's a Facebook site that's like a fake Edgar Oliver Facebook site. And that site says that my birthday is October 31st, but it's not. It's June 13th.
Like Jesus or something.
Yeah. It's June 13th. Happy Face's birthday is October 31st. And I think that probably had a great influence on his life.
Okay.
However, I will say that over the years, many of the years that La Mama would book me to do shows, they would always book me, almost always around Halloween, so that I would be performing at Halloween.
Right.
And, I always loved that.
So you did The Ghost of Brooklyn, The Lost Bedroom. Are these autobiographical pieces as well?
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about Peter Pan's thing.
Wendy and John. Let's go back to the Pyramid Club.
Yeah, when I was talking about the different amazing performers at the Pyramid, I wanted to also make sure and mention John Sachs and Wendy Wilde, who were both really great. Also Tanya Ransom. I'm sure other people will pop into my head.
So working at La Mama, were they mostly monologues, or did you also do plays with other people?
I did quite a few plays with other people, starting with the 7-Year Vacation.
Okay. How many people were in that play?
There was the little boy, the mother, one person playing all the victims, one person playing the botanist and the policeman. So I guess 4 people.
Wow. And it's about?
Well, it's about a little boy who travels north by train with his mother for their summer vacation. And they're supposed to get off in Baltimore to visit their great aunt Maud, but the mother can't stand visiting relatives. So instead they get off the train early in Richmond, and they wind up wandering through a cemetery where they discover a forgotten cave. And they wind up living in the cave in the cemetery. And the mother is obsessed with banana splits and goes on a banana split diet and becomes somewhat unhinged. And she begins murdering drunken bombshells who stagger into the cemetery at night. And she convinces the little boy that they're both vampires. And it's about their lives together. And to me at the time it was just a very autobiographical play about my childhood.
Could see that. How about The Ghost of Brooklyn?
Well, that was sort of another was derived from a novel, a short novel that I was working on at the time, that I decided that I would excerpt scenes from and stage about a little boy and his mother who've been up north for the summer on their summer vacation, and they're now waiting in the train station to return back home. But the mother goes into the ladies' room and never returns. And the little boy sits there in the waiting room for 7 years, waiting for her to come out of the ladies' room, afraid to go in and look for her. And eventually he gets up and wanders out into the streets of the city, and he winds up living in this big overgrown park. And about his life as this wild boy living in the park who's drifted away from humanity.
Is this how you feel when you go to Prospect Park, when you do In the Park?
Yeah,
That
it was kind of,
wonderful-
In the Park could be seen as a late continuation of The Ghost of Brooklyn many, many years later, but just told from my own real, literal, truthful point of view.
The Lost Bedroom.
Well, that play, I had met my dear friend Jason Bauer, whom I speak of in East 10th Street, and I then asked him to direct The Ghost of Brooklyn at La Mama. That was a one-night-only production. And then I got booked for I guess it was the next year, to come up with a new play. And I just didn't think that I would ever be able to write another play. And I told Jason, as the time for the booking approached, it was a 3-week booking, that we would just restage the 7-year vacation. That was all I could think of to do. And then it was about a month before the show was supposed to open. And Jason invited Helen and me to go with him to see a play by called Another Person is a Foreign Country. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was directed by Anne Hamburger. And it took place outside, across the facade of this old abandoned tuberculosis hospital, right across from Central Park West on like 106th Street. And they'd set up bleachers outside, so I went to that and with Jason and Helen. And I just found it very inspiring, just that it was just a bunch of lunatics who would kind of appear one after the other from various portals of this ruinous facade. And I thought, wow, I could maybe do something like that, And I went home and I started writing this show about this little boy and his mother who arrived at this haunted motel by a crazy amusement park by the seashore. It was all based loosely on Coney Island. And I wrote the thing in a week. And then we had 3 weeks left to cast it and for Helen to make all the sets and stage it and rehearse it. And we did it, And it was a 2-act play.
Wow. Now, we did Motel Blue, and Jason directed it that time that you mentioned it before as well, all right?
Yeah.
The Coney Island Horror Show, was that a separate event? I couldn't tell from the list that I had, but it may just have been something that I couldn't separate.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. How about Mosquito Succulents?
Well, I guess that was the next play that I wrote. When once again I had a booking at La Mama, and I just thought, well, I wrote a play that was based very much on a night in the savannah with Mother and Helen, just a night of our lives together, in the house on 36th Street, when we would be up all night doing the Ouija board with Mother, you know, and this voice would come through the Ouija saying, "Don't go to sleep, tonight's the night of the killer. Don't go to sleep or you'll wake up dead," which would happen a lot. That was the first time that Helen appeared in one of my autobiographical plays, because it was the little girl and the little boy and their mother, all three together, up all night, waiting for the killer to strike. And that was that play.
Then the following couple of years you did When She Had Bloodlust.
Yes, which was that I sort of threw together from all these different things. I don't even know if I still have a script for that.
How about Hands in Wartime? The Gloaming Project, what was that?
That was a production company that Jason founded.
Okay.
But this was also a play that was commissioned by La Mama, you know, and which I wrote as a 2-character play. And it's a young man who's hopelessly in love with this older man who kidnaps and murders children. It's a very, very dark play. It's strange to say, none of these plays has ever been staged again. They were only staged for their premieres at La Mama, and never staged again.
Are there plans to do so?
I would love at some point to do so. You know.
How about Hollow Moon?
I don't recognize that.
The Master of Monstrosity?
That was another revisiting of Motel Blue 19.
I Am a Coffin?
That was a very strange play that I wrote about a man played by me who was the magician's assistant. And the magician is this man that he's in love with, who saws a woman in half and then refuses to put her back together again. And the adventures of the two different halves of this woman. It's a very strange play.
Was it performed with actual halves?
Yes, it was.
Wow.
We did the whole sawing in half trick. We had to have that built.
Fabulous. Who built it for you?
My friend Julius Klein, a sculptor and painter from the whole East Village scene.
How about Drowning Pages?
That was commissioned by La Mama. And it's a script that I love. That was staged as a musical. There was a small orchestra there for the show every night, and there were songs in it. how does it begin? It's a little, I'll just tell you the sequence of events, perhaps. It begins with a monologue that by me about well, it's a play that's all about drowning, which is set mainly in an amusement park by the seashore. But it opens with a man a young man who's gone to the ophthalmologist for an eye exam. And the ophthalmologist puts drops in his eyes. And he begins seeing these strange things. And then his dead mother appears and tells him to come back to the curb where she's waiting to take him to the fair. It just kind of goes from there and gets stranger and stranger as it goes.
My boys frighten me. I am not a ghost.
That was a show that I curated where I had a booking at La Mama, but I just couldn't come up with a play. So I decided that I would do a short monologue and invite other performers to perform with me. So I made and I performed like 20-minute pieces by 3 other people that I invited to join me there, which...
How did it get its title? Yes, whimsy. How about London Town?
Well, that was my piece.
Oh, I thought I am not a ghost was your piece, so it was London Town was part of that. I got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Which was a monologue about my year living alone in that abandoned, condemned hotel in London.
Did you do poetry while you were there with the other people? You said they did poetry readings in the bar.
No, I was so shy that I only went there once, the first time that I got there. And the bartender showed me my room. And then I never went back. I would sneak into the lobby and sneak up the stairs. I was too shy to ever go into the bar in the back. Just terribly sad now when I think about it. I could have had some friends.
The Etiquette of Death.
That's a show that my memory is going.
We can get back to that if you want to think about it later.
Okay.
I just heard a little thing about it saying all of the mores and etiquette surrounding the people who go to funerals.
I just can't remember the name of the person who wrote most of it now.
Chris Tanner?
Chris Tanner, yes. Right. Chris Tanner wrote the main skeleton of that play.
Okay.
Based on his aunt, who was an amazing woman, I gather, whom he loved, who sold cosmetics, and it's about her doing a cosmetic makeover for death. But Chris Tanner invited different other writers to contribute pieces to the show. anything about death. And so I gave him a poem about death, which was about, like, one day when I walked out front of the house on 10th Street, and I was sitting on the front stoop, and there was a pigeon sitting on the air conditioner that was out front of the window of the house next door. And the pigeon was dying. So it's a poem I wrote about sitting there and how the pigeon was sort of terrified of me, and went away to leave it to die by itself. And so Chris put it in the show, and he made the chorus. There was a chorus of different performers that he made into pigeons. They were all pigeons.
Wow.
Because of that, which I thought was really fun. And I loved the show. I thought it was great.
It's genius, yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
About London, Paris.
Well, that was this past spring. So this year, and I had just really done a new show at Turney Street in the fall at Axis, and I had a booking at La Mama. It was the first time in a long time, and I didn't know what I could possibly do. So I asked Randy, Randy Sharp from Axis, who had directed me in Attorney Street, if she would direct me in something, and I was thinking, I didn't know what it would be, that I thought maybe it would be a revival of something. And Randy said, yeah, I'll direct you, but I'll only direct you if you'll do a new show. She said, I know you can come up with something, just, do a show about stories about living in Paris with Helen and your year in London. So I said, okay, and, started writing stuff, and we put it together and came up with it.
During this time, you were also on NPR, The Moth. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about that and the tour that you took that George Green had put together, who started The Moth. And I would love to hear about that.
Okay. Well, at some point about 20 years ago, I got a phone call from someone saying that they'd gotten a recommendation that I would be a good storyteller to tell a story for the show that was going to happen. And would I please come meet them at the Chelsea Hotel? So I went up to the Chelsea Hotel, and the place I was supposed to go was on the second floor, and it was a big suite on the second floor, which it turned out was a beauty parlor run by this woman who had her beauty parlor there in the Chelsea Hotel. And she had been asked to curate a moth. And I didn't know what the moth was. And she said, well, it's this storytelling event. And it's going to happen at the Lansky Lounge. And the theme is going to be revenge. And I was told you would be good for it. And in order for you to see what this show you're going to be in is like, come to the one that's happening this week, which is about hair, which is why we're meeting in this beauty parlor. So I said, okay. And so I went to the Lansky Lounge, and it was a whole show about hair, stories about hair. And it was emceed by Jonathan Ames. Do you know Jonathan Ames? An amazing writer and performer who was, has a sort of obsession with going bald. And so, he curated this whole night about hair. And I met, and I loved it, and I was so excited because Jonathan Ames wrote a column then for, I think, the East Village Eye, and I was a fan of his writing. And I met George Green that night, and then I came back a few weeks later and told this story, The Moth, and then they kept inviting me back to tell stories there, and I became good friends with George, and with Catherine Burns, and it was kind of strange because George is from St. Simon's Island, which is not far south of Savannah on the coast. So he'd grown up there, but we'd never met there. We didn't meet until here in New York 20 years ago. But I had not been back to Savannah since Mother died in 1983, when I met George. Which was like and he invited me back to Savannah to take part in the Unchained tour.
Now, is that the first time the Unchained tour had ever happened? Was it created for this specific event?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I had an amazing time.
9 cities in 1 week? Is that what I read?
Yeah. There were many little towns where we would perform in, like, the local little bookstore.
Oh, wow. And you were not the only person on the bus performing, right?
There were, I think, like 5 storytellers.
Mm-hmm. And musicians as well?
And musicians and a host and George and different people to help us. And it was just on this old school bus from the 1970s, which had been painted with all these scenes from the stories of the different storytellers and scenes from writings by different famous writers from Savannah. And it was an incredible experience. I think I went on 4 of those Unchained tours.
After that?
With George, 3 after that.
Wow.
4 all told.
Did you keep the same bus?
Yeah.
I didn't think it was ever going to stay together from what I'd read about it.
Well, it sort of broke down after the first 2 nights on the first tour. We didn't actually use that bus again until the second tour because it was in such terrible shape. But we did manage to keep it going through 3 more tours.
Oh, wow. Yeah. But then at this point, tell me how the George and Randy, Axis and the Moth got together to the transition, I guess, to the Axis company. They both wanted you to do a play for them?
Yeah, George had very much wanted me to make a full-length evening of stories about my childhood. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about that and had been for quite a while, but then Randy and Brian from Axis said, we'd really love for you to, do a show of stories about being all alone in the house on 10th Street. And I guess, they had a booking coming up and they really wanted to do it, to kind of launch it and get it done pretty quickly. And, so I told George, look, would it be okay if I just did that first? And he said, sure, if you think you can do it, why not? And I started having meetings with Randy and Brian. We came up with this show, and it wound up being like a real hit, a downtown hit. So I'm so glad that we went ahead and just did it,
Mm-hmm.
And then later I went ahead and started working with Catherine Burns from the Moth on the show that George wanted to produce.
And which one was that?
The one about my childhood,
Mm-hmm.
Helen and
Helen
Edgar,
and Edgar. Mm-hmm.
which I loved
Right.
also. And then after that,
So you'd already done Attorney Street.
no.
Okay, so then that came after those East 10th and
Well,
Yeah.
first there was East 10th
Mhm.
Street with Randy and Brian. And then with George and Catherine, I did Helen and Edgar.
Mhm.
And then I decided that I would like to try and do a sequel to in East 10th Street with Randy, that I wanted to do something very experimental that was more meditative about my life now. So I told Randy and Brian that I was at Axis and I was interested in that, and they said, sure, let's try and work on it. So we did, and we came up with In the Park. Then it was a year and a half ago, I guess, we were thinking of staging In the Park again. And then Randy said, well, I've always thought of it as those as the first two parts of a trilogy. Let's see if we can come up with a third one. So we came up with Attorney Street.
And then when did you do Chop Off Your Ear?
When do I say it?
That was with Michael Lawrence. You co-wrote that together. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
All right.
That was I think that show took place over 3 nights. We had a 3-night booking at the Angel Orange Sons Foundation.
Where is that?
It's that beautiful old synagogue on Norfolk Street between Houston and Stanton, right south of Houston.
Did Michael perform that with you as well as co-write it, or what was it about? Was it about ears?
Well, I decided to call it that. That was my title. Because it wound up being mainly based on crazy, drunken voicemail messages that I would leave in the middle of the night for Michael Lawrence and our friend Mark Palmieri, who, were these two men that were kind of best friends, that I was sort of in love with both of them. And this was in the time before cell phones, when people, if they had voicemail, they had like this app service where you would call in to get your messages.
Right.
So you could call up and leave messages for people at any time of day, and you knew that you were never going to be disturbing them. So I would leave, these crazy messages for them that they loved getting. And Michael suggested doing a show based on some of those messages. So we put it together
Oh, that's great.
with other scenes that he wrote added in. It was a fun show that I don't know if it ever I don't think it got videotaped or anything. I don't think there's any record of it.
You'll have to redo it.
Yeah.
My Green Hades.
That show was commissioned by George Dimas.
It was done at the Phil Bosikowski
Yeah.
room, which at that time was part of Primary Stages.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
very interesting.
And that was a theater festival that my dear friend George Dimas was producing, and he asked for new works from a series of like 5 artists. And I think I had like a 2-week run there, so I wrote a play. Which is kind of set in Prospect Park. About a boy who's playing baseball in Prospect Park with some other boys. They're all playing baseball together, and the ball gets struck and it flies off into the woods, and this boy goes into the woods chasing this baseball, and he never returns. And it's scenes about him interspersed with scenes of Helen and I going back to Mother's room in Georgetown after her death to go through her possessions. This boy in the woods who winds up being murdered, and these foxes find his body. It's a very strange play that I think is very beautiful, that was only staged that once, like many of those plays.
Was it staged literally? Were there foxes and...
There were actors playing foxes, yeah.
Wow, sounds beautiful. And you're also a stage actor when you're not writing on other people's plays, such as When Lithuania Ruled the World. Such a great title.
Yes. Well, that is a play by a dear friend of mine named Kęstutis Narkas, a Lithuanian playwright, an amazing playwright, who also was someone who was very much instrumental in getting me involved in theater when I was first starting out at the Pyramid.
And where was that done?
That was staged, it was in 3 parts, parts 1, 2, and 3. Part 1 was staged at the Pyramid. Part 2 was staged at La Mama. And Part 3 was staged at the Anthology Film Archives, which they sometimes at that point were using as a theater space as well as to show films.
Did the audience walk from one space to the other during the evening?
Well, there were scenes that took place on the stage where now the film screen is. There were also scenes on platforms the length of the auditorium.
Were they done separately, or were they done all together in one evening?
Separately.
Separately, got it. Then you were in Edward II at Cliplight Theater.
Yes.
You playing the lead?
No, I was playing Captain Ahab. The lead was my friend Mark Panieri, who wrote the play.
Oh, wonderful. And who was this Edward II?
Wait, are you talking about Carl II or Edward II?
Edward II. I had an Edward at the Cliplet, and I also have Carl II.
Oh,
Are
okay,
they
I'm
two
thinking
different
of
plays?
Carl II.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Carl II. That
Okay.
sounds more interesting. Yeah,
Yes,
all right.
that was an original play by Mark Panieri.
Okay. And you were Captain Ahab.
Mm-hmm. And it was sort of a fictionalized autobiographical play that Mark wrote about a young man who is second in everything in his life. He has an older brother who's very successful, and he's always slightly less successful and always comes in second and just constantly playing second fiddle. And he winds up having this beautiful romance with this woman who loves him but can't convince him that she really does love him, because he just has so utterly lacking in self-confidence. And eventually he winds up sailing away on this ship of the souls of lost men, like Charles Bovary, people like that. But the ship is piloted by Captain Ahab, so I was Ahab.
And they're going to have fun.
Yes. It was fun, except it was pretty tricky having a wooden leg on stage.
How about Dial M for Model? And Lipsinka was in that as well?
Yeah, Lipsinka wrote and starred in that. That was a play about some glamorous fashion models from the 60s who wind up falling into the clutches of some strange unknown killer who winds up being the fiendish fashion designer Dalian, whom I played. That was a musical. I think the only stage show in which I've had a real song and dance number with Lipsinka.
Trinity?
That's a play by Randy Sharp
Okay.
of Axis,
Right.
about Robert Oppenheimer and the creation of, the atomic bomb.
Wow. A Glance at New York?
That's a play that Randy staged and directed, based on the text of a play called A Glance at New York that was a huge hit in New York in 1849, that Randy staged it as though we were all members of the original cast, who somehow found ourselves caught in a time vortex and delivered onto an empty stage in the pitch darkness, not knowing where we are, and still thinking that we're in 1849 and that the only way to stay alive is to keep performing this play that we vaguely remember. It was an amazing production.
You went to Edinburgh with that.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
It was a beautiful work of art that Randy made out of this whole play.
USS Frankenstein?
Another play that Randy Sharp wrote about the atomic bomb being delivered to I guess, wherever it was that it was then
Put on the plane.
put on the plane.
The Enola Gay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's the bomb is on the boat with its own creator and the kind of skeletal crew of the boat are all sailing towards this strange destiny with this bomb that I played. I played the bomb.
Oh my God, that's fabulous. The hospital series I'm going to up, and Randy has written this.
Yes. The hospital series has taken place over the years, for many years. I don't know how many years hospital has been going on.
Is it a staged performance?
Yes, in a series in 4 different weeks.
Oh, wow. Is it changing every time they do it?
Yeah,
Wow. And now you're doing 7 in 1 blow. Is that correct?
yes. Which is an amazing play Randy wrote, Randy Sharp, which is a children's play, loosely based on a Grimm's Brothers fairy tale called 7 in 1 Blow, or The Brave Little Tailor.
Right.
But it's a very beautiful play, an original play by Randy that we've been doing now every December for the past 16 years.
Wow. You've written a novel, The Man Who Loves Plants.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an autobiographical novel?
Yeah,
Okay. And you performed in Gentlemen Broncos,
yes.
which is a movie.
Yeah, that's a movie directed by Jared Hess, who also directed Napoleon Dynamite.
Right.
Gentlemen Broncos is, I think, a great comedy. It's a great movie. I think he's an incredible artist.
You performed with Sam Rockwell in that film.
Yes, I'm so proud of having been in that movie.
That's great.
Yeah.
The Jimmy Show, another movie.
Yes. Directed by Frank Whaley, based on a play by, oh God, as I said, I'm sort of,
That's all right.
it's a wonderful comedy as well.
With Ethan Hawke and Lynn Cohen, who actually is a
Yes.
friend of ours. Yeah.
Yes, it's a wonderful movie.
Henry May Long.
That's a movie that Randy Sharp wrote and directed. That's
what's that
wonderful
about?
as well. It's about a glass merchant who falls in love with the son of a very wealthy New York family. But the son winds up becoming addicted to laudanum. And it's about his adventures with this young man who's in love with him. In order to win the affections of this wealthy laudanum addict, the glass manufacturer pretends that he's an invalid who's dying.
That's
It's a
beautiful.
beautiful story.
That sounds fantastic. That's Beautiful Frank, also directed by Randy Sharp.
That's not directed by Randy Sharp.
Sorry. You play a futuristic performance artist in that one, correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's a wonderful movie as well. That was directed by Jeff Burns. Is it possible to request not speaking about that?
Yes, absolutely.
I just
Now,
really
you've had
don't-
collaborations with Octave Doctors.
Yes.
That sounds delightful. You're a percussionist in that?
Yes, that's a band founded by my dear friend Aaron Howard, who also founded Oil Can Press.
And published all your books of poetry.
Yes,
Fabulous.
handmade editions of my poetry books.
One of which I would like. Is this visible?
Yeah.
There we are, a beautiful copy of this one called The Lost Bedroom, with pictures by Louise and photos of Helen and Edgar in it. It's fabulous.
Yes,
Oil
I
Can
love
Press.
that book. I love Oil Can Press.
I know you have to go for a tech soon, and I would love to know if you have thoughts about the future of off Broadway and alternative theater that you're so busy performing in.
Well, I love the fact that it seems like off Broadway theater is getting more critical attention these days than it used to get.
From uptown critics, is that what you're thinking? Uh-huh.
Yeah, and that I think is really great.
Mm-hmm.
And
Do you think that will change the work in any way?
I hope that it just makes it more satisfying for people, and that it makes it easier for people to be seen and appreciated. I hope that's what will happen.
Right.
Because I think off-Broadway theater is immensely important.
Yeah.
Because it's where experiments can be made and risks taken.
Would you like to discuss any of the other things? You have a record that you did, which sounded so delicious since it was in 3 colors.
Oh,
Of
yes.
which again, that to me just sounded so magical and delightful. 45, our PM record, which was a single of In the Park, which you had published in 3 colors of 150 editions.
Well, yeah, that was a record that was produced by Jack White,
Okay.
and he invited me to come to Nashville to record with him in his studio. And I'm trying to think of names again. Well, so it's a 45 RPM record, and it's 3 poems of mine that we recorded together there. That was part of a series of spoken word records that he produced, and I'm very proud of that record.
Is it still available in the black edition?
I believe it is, yes.
Fabulous. Okay. I will mail away for it.
Good.
I was wondering. Is there anything else you would like to tell us about the most extraordinary work that you've done?
Let's see. I guess please order books from Oil Can Press.
Yes.
I'm very proud of those books. And I hope to do another show with Randy at Axis. I hope to do another show that George Green produces and Catherine Burns directs. I'd love to work at La Mama again. I hope there's still new shows left in me. I'll certainly try to keep coming up with new stuff. Just keep trying to do things. I will, and that's my message to anybody working and starting out in theater too, is just keep on trying to do stuff.
Thank you for being with us and bringing all these wonderful people to our attention.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you. We just were asking whether or not Helen is still prevalent in the performance art world, and you said?
Oh yes, that I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that Helen is very much still working and creating beautiful paintings and sculptures, and also I would love again to work with Helen on stage shows, and I look very much forward to some more of Helen's sets.
And where is she working right now?
At this point, Helen works often in Italy,
Wow.
but she does also come regularly to New York, and is doing stuff here on a regular basis.
I heard that they hired her to do another room at the hotel.
Yes, at the Carlton Arms.
Okay.
Helen loves to go there and paint, and they've been making Helen so delightfully welcome there.
And people from all over the world request that room when they go to the hotel. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Well, here's to Helen.
To Helen,
Thank you.
thanks.